and welcome to the podcast of Gem State Chronicle. That's right, with the new year comes a new brand, and I am excited to continue to grow this platform. You can still find all my essays, articles, and videos at gemstate.substack.com, but you can find all that and more at gemstatechronicle.com. Paid subscribers on Substack will still get exclusive and early access to a lot of content, but now you can also advertise your business on the Chronicle, and soon you'll be able to support the platform through the merch store as well. I really appreciate the support, and I'm excited to see what the new year brings. Today I want to talk about a basic question of identity. What does it mean to be an Idahoan? What does it mean to be an American? These are questions that we as a people have wrestled with for decades or even centuries without coming to any firm conclusion. Is America a specific group of people, or is it an idea? If it's just an idea, can we deport those who don't align with it? The core of America at its founding was a reasonably diverse group of English and Scots-Irish settlers who fought the Revolution and founded a new nation. By World War I, however, that core had been added to by immigrants from Germany, Italy, and Russia, and other places. This migration changed the nature of the American people, but all were united in the nationalistic fervor of the World Wars and the Cold War. However, since the 1965 Immigration Act, millions of people from what we call the Third World have been coming here, which continues to change our national character. Migration is an integral part of the human experience, and the movement of peoples is a great driver of human history. Our own mother country, Great Britain, developed through the migration of several successive people groups, starting with the Celts in prehistory, then the Romans in the first centuries after Christ, then the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, then the Norse, and finally the Norman French after 1066. Each of these waves of people changed the character of the country, but the country also changed them. The Normans make a perfect example of this. Their ancestors were Norse Vikings, Norman, Northmen, who were granted land in northern France on the condition that they protect it from continued raiding. They therefore developed as hybrids, combining the best aspects of their Scandinavian heritage with the best of Frankish France. When they conquered England, they became something new once again, combining with the Anglo-Celtic culture of Britain to create what we know of as the English people. Those English, as well as Scots, Irish, and Welsh, came to America, and their experiences in the New World once more created a brand new people group, one that would dominate the world in the 20th century. Now, if I were to say that I'm more American than others because my ancestors were here before the Declaration of Independence, I'd probably get some dirty looks. People might even accuse me of racism. Yet, we often see people here in Idaho make basically the same argument. The specter of a fifth-generation Idahoan telling someone who moved here in the last 10 years that their opinion is therefore invalid has become so common as to be a meme. It is a little weird, isn't it? Having an opinion on who is called American is decidedly politically incorrect. Yet some Idaho natives go full blood and soil when it comes to who gets to have a say in our state's direction. At the same time, many of those who point to their Idaho ancestry as a reason they deserve more of a say than a California transplant see no problem with amnesty or even citizenship for illegal migrants who work on big corporate farms. It is all very mixed up. California itself was the beneficiary of mass migration from around 1850 to the end of the 20th century. In the presidential election of 1920, California had only 13 electoral votes. That was fewer than Georgia, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and several other states. By 1932, it had 22, and then 25 in 1944. In 1988, the last time California voted for a Republican president, George H.W. Bush took California's 47 electoral votes. The state peaked after the 2010 census with 55 electoral votes, but will only have 54 this coming November, the first time its population has decreased in American history. Mass migration to California from the eastern United States created a Republican stronghold, but mass migration from Central and South America turned it blue. And now conservatives are moving away from the state that their great-grandparents had moved to in the first place. Life goes on, people move, and society changes. The question before us, then, is how can we guide the evolution of our society, our state, so that it continues to reflect the timeless principles that we hold dear? This is once again coming to a head as my hometown of Eagle has received national attention for being an attractive destination for California retirees. The LA Times wrote an article about retired Californians coming up here with their six-figure pensions, and then it was picked up by Fox News, so the eyes of the nation are upon us. So what's happening is that these retired public sector employees, many of whom are police officers and firefighters and who generally consider themselves conservative, are bringing their generous pensions to Idaho and to Eagle especially, and reviews are mixed. Are they crypto liberals because they come from California? Are they extreme conservatives because they're coming up here and wanting to save Idaho from the same blue swing that happened in their state? That really is the question. In the last year, Senator Brian Lenny, who, did move from California, has been accused of being both. I moved to Idaho from Washington in September of 2018, which puts me in a rather awkward position of being seen as a newcomer by those whose families migrated here in the 19th century, but I feel like a native compared to those who moved here since COVID. The span of time from 2020 to 2022 feels like an eternity. So at what point can I call myself an Idahoan? 3 of my 5 children were born here. I've been a precinct committee man, a delegate to 2 state conventions. I sit on my local public library board. And for what it's worth, I really like potatoes. I recognize that I still have a lot to learn. The past few days have been interesting. I began my notes for this episode while visiting my former home state of Washington for the first time in 4 years. I drove by the elementary school I attended as a child. I drove by the church where my grandparents were married. I drove by the cemetery where my great-grandparents are buried. I visited the town in which I grew up and graduated high school, and I even drove by the house I bought and sold up in Federal Way right before moving out to Idaho. While it all felt familiar, it also felt a little bit like visiting a foreign country. Somehow, sometime, Idaho has become my home. As I drove down Interstate 84 last night, crossing the Snake River and seeing the Welcome to Idaho sign, it felt, for the first time, like I was coming home rather than leaving it. I have roots in Washington, but I am growing new ones in the Gem State. As much as I miss the trees, the mountains, and the rain, Idaho has become my home, and it will be until the day I die. I'm not moving anywhere else. Perhaps the most interesting thing I've learned about what it means to be an Idahoan is that there's more to it than simple ancestry. The regions of Idaho are different from each other. You have the ultra-conservatives of North Idaho, the social conservatives of Eastern Idaho, who nevertheless see value to bigger government, and the melting pot of the Treasure Valley. Religiously, you have Latter-day Saints, Evangelicals, Baptists, Lutherans, Catholics, Jews, atheists, agnostics, and more. You have a lot of Americans of European descent, as well as a lot of Hispanics, a lot of Basques, all of whom are Idahoan in their own way. There's no one definition of an Idahoan. There's no single Idaho way. Anyone claiming otherwise is just trying to put a nativist veneer on whatever political position they're pushing. All of us, whether our families came in 1820 or 2020, can work together to protect traditional conservative values while honoring the history of this special place. Yet those who, like me, came here in the last decade must realize that things are different here. You see, for most of human history, societies have had the pressure valve of the wilderness. There's always been a frontier to which those who are unsatisfied with the state of civilization could escape into. 1,000 years ago, ambitious young men with no hope of glory in their hometowns in France, Italy, or Germany could take the cross and build a new legacy in the Holy Land. After 1492, that same sort of man could cross the seas and create a new life in the New World. In the 1800s, people in America, both those whose grandfathers were here before the Revolution and those just off the boat, could head west and find their fortunes or simply satisfy their longing to get away from it all. There was a fun movie back in the early 90s called Far and Away with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. It tells the story of a young Irishman who was oppressed in his native land, so he and his landlord's daughter run off to America. At first, he makes a living by boxing in Boston before heading west to take part in the Oklahoma land rush. It's a somewhat silly movie at times, but it's fun because it shows pictures of life in 3 different places, all at the same time near the turn of the 20th century. And it really shows how the pressure valve of the New World and the Old West gave people opportunities to build their lives outside of existing society. My own family legacy is proof of that. One line of my ancestors migrated from Scotland to Ireland and then to New England in the 1700s. Each generation, some of them stayed behind and put down roots, but my ancestors continued pushing west, first to the shores of Lake Erie, and then to Illinois, then to Iowa, and finally to Washington, where my great-grandparents drove a baby overland car across the country. They were followed by thousands of people driven west by the Depression, looking for any work they could find, and then World War II sparked another migration, as at first civilians sought work in factories, and then returning soldiers sought new lives for themselves and their families. Where is that pressure valve today? The map's been completely filled in. There's no longer a frontier for the brave and the restless to explore. Now we're simply exchanging one style of civilization for another rather than conquering an untamed wilderness. President Franklin Roosevelt justified the massive expansion of federal government during his term in part to the closing of the West and the need for more civilization throughout the country. Was he right? Is the age of the rugged individualist finished? And now we must accept that government is the things we do together? I don't think so, but we have to recognize that things really are different now. At the turn of the 20th century, a young lawyer named William Borah hopped on a westbound train and got off in Boise when he ran out of money. He'd go on to become one of our most famous senators, influencing American policy for decades and inspiring generations of young people to enter politics themselves. The Boise of the Old West that Borah found at the end of his journey no longer exists. But that's not stopping tens of thousands of people from coming to Idaho in search of liberty and a new life. Just as our ancestors left Europe with its crowded cities, strict class structure, and old ways of doing things for something new, so also are people escaping crumbling blue states for Florida, Texas, and Idaho. This new great migration of the 21st century, it's the movement of Americans from blue states to red, which in turn makes the blue states bluer and the red states redder. This migration is only increasing political polarization, but that's inevitable, isn't it? At least we know where the battle lines are going to be drawn. Like all migrations, this one will change both the migrants and the society into which they're moving. Refugees from California, Oregon, Colorado, or Washington must accept that things are different here in Idaho. Just because things were done a certain way back home doesn't mean that will work here. On the other hand, the 5th-generation Idahoans must recognize that our country is changing, and these new arrivals carry with them an energy to fight for conservative principles and traditional values in a nation that's increasingly hostile to those things. We need that energy now. Idaho is my home, and I pray that my children will continue to make it their home when they're grown. I want my great-great-great-grandchildren to be able to call themselves 5th-generation Idahoans, and to enjoy this great state for the same reasons that I came here in 2018. To ensure that happens, I have devoted myself to a movement to preserve traditional values and conservative principles. If you're listening to this, then I know that you want the same thing. To make that happen, to protect our way of life from a country and a world gone mad, it means that we need to work together. Whether you moved here in 2021, or if your great-great-grandparents herded sheep here a century ago, or even if your ancestors once roamed these lands centuries before white Europeans arrived, you are Idaho. I am Idaho. We are Idaho. And together we can keep Idaho the greatest state in America. My name is Brian Allman, and this has been the podcast of the Gem State Chronicle. Visit the website at gemstatechronicle.com, and I'll see you next time.